There's something magical about making water. Today it was time for another simple but incredibly cool technique. We're going to make some water to give Wonky Willie a place to swim. So let's get started.
Let's build the base.
First I'm going to make some circles. I want an outer circle, I want an inner circle, and I want a circle the size in between. After cutting I have my small silver circle, I have the silver border, and I have the in-between size white circle. Next I'm going to emboss the small silver circle. I spray the back with a little bit of water and I line up the circle in my embossing folder. I line it up at the right so it hangs a bit over the edge on the other side, and then I run it through the machine. And this is what it looks like after embossing. Now let's work on the silver circle some more.
Let's make some water.
I add a bit of paint on my makeout station. This is Dilutions paint and this one is translucent, and I'm going to apply it with a sponge. First I try pouncing, but that creates too much texture, so I'm going to use a soft brush. I'm just applying my paint from side to side and top to bottom, adding a nice layer to the wavy surface. So I get a bit more color difference, but also a smoother result. And once I've added paint all over my piece, I'm going to lightly swipe over it with my brush again to make some stripes in one direction. And then I'm going to put it aside to dry. And while that is drying, let's not waste any time.
Let's make a background.
I have another embossing folder for my background, and I'm going to make my card half A4 size big. So it's a big card. So this piece is not going to fit in the embossing folder at once, so I'm going to do it in 2 takes. Just emboss one half and then turn it around and emboss the other half. And this is what it looks like after embossing, and you can push or press that middle part a little bit down. The paper is a bit more flexible after embossing, and you can always cover that seam with something if needed. Now we have some pretty texture.
And now let's add some color.
I'm going to add a layer of Distress Oxide spray. And then I spray some water and then I let it dry. Next I have a dark blue oxide spray and I'm going to add some splats. And this is all about layering, creating depth and creating texture, and then spray some more water. And I wanted a bit more of that darker color, so I spray some of the color as well. And then I blot the background. Next I want to add a bit of rust, so I'm going to use the tube of the spray bottle to add some drops by flicking it on, as well as tapping on the cap to get some different size spots. And then I'm going to put this aside to dry. While the background is drying, let's go
back to the water.
The circle is dry now and I'm adding it back in the embossing folder, so the pattern is supported by the shape of the embossing folder. And then I'm going to use a wet wipe to rub over it. And this will help to remove bits of the paint that is on the raised parts of the pattern that are really sticking out, revealing bits of the silver from the Cardstock again, giving me some real cool silvery lines in between that blue silver water. And the harder you rub over it and the longer you rub over it, the grungier the effect will be. I just want to reveal bits of that silver and give it a tiny bit of a grungy look. That's some gorgeous texture. And now
back to the background.
Now let's deepen those colors. I'm using the same colors ink to deepen the color. So I'm going over the rusty parts with rusty Hinge from the ink pad. And I'm using an ink blending tool. And I'm going over the sides of the card with chipped sapphire to bring out that pattern even more. Big tool for big pieces, small tool for tiny pieces. I also wanted to color the smaller parts, those screws or bolts along the seam. And for that I'm using the double size blender brushes. And this makes it easier to go over those smaller parts, coloring only that. And this way you can make them pop even more. And isn't it cool to see how a tiny bit of color can make such a big difference? Then I'm going to color the complete outline of the card. And I always like the way this adds a really nice finish. And I think it's totally worth adding little details like this. I colored the white circle with the dark blue ink and applied it with the ink pad straight to the paper. Next I'm going to work on my silver circle. I use a piece of steel wool to distress the top of that silver circle, getting rid of that super shine of the silver and giving it a grungy look. Now this looks pretty distressed, but will it be enough? And then I'm going to add some foam tape to the back of that circle.
Back to the background again.
And I wasn't quite done with that background yet, so I'm going to tear some pieces. I know a lot of you are expecting me to tear something, so let's just do that. I'm tearing. And now I just make a little tear and then add some ink along that edge of the tear. And I do that in a few places. I'm just tearing my paper to the back, adding some ink, and then I put it back in place. And if too much of the white is showing, I'm going to add a bit of ink on that white part as well. And then I'm ready to put this background to my card.
Putting it all together.
I have the circle with the unembossed part pointing down, and then I'm going to add Wonky Willie 1 and 2. And you can see by adding him in the water or on the water, he already looks so much happier. So biggest Willie I'm going to add straight to the background, flat, and the little one I'm going to add with a bit of foam tape, so he's a bit raised and give you a bit more dimension. Then I'm going to cut off part of his tail so it's hanging over the edge a tiny bit, and then I'm going to add a silver circle to finish that stack. And you can see a tiny bit of the blue is showing around that embossed edge, creating some shade and giving it a nice finish as well. And what's better than swimming alone? Swimming together, of course. Meet Wonky Willie's new friends. They are all available in my Gumroad store as printables as well as PNG files. And you can find the link up here, I think, as well as in the description box below this video. And then I'm ready to adhere my circle to my card.
Let's add some sparkle.
And then it's time to give that bottom part of the circle a nice finish. So I'm going to apply a bit of glossy accents. And then I'm going to grab some bits and pieces. I have some clear seed beads. Then I'm going to sprinkle it on the glossy accents. I have a lid underneath the card to catch those beads that are falling off, so they don't scatter all over my desk. And it makes it way easier to pick them up and get them back in the package again. And of course we need some sparkle. And what's better for that than using some glitter? And yes, now we are talking. But I think we need more. I also found some sequins in different shapes and shades that are going to be a fun sparkling addition to this bottom part. These sequins come in different sizes and the small ones are a great addition to my sparkling ocean floor. I'm using a skewer to press all the pieces into the glossy accents so they stay put and don't fall off the card. And at this point you can still move them around a little bit. And you also have the chance of shaping your ocean floor. And details like this can make such a big difference. I just love adding details like this. For me, that brings out the fun in paper crafting. And then I'm going to put this aside to dry. Last week I created and colored Wonky Willie and he was embraced by many. The comments showed you all loved him and it made him blush.
More fiddling with the background.
And while I was looking for shiny bits and pieces, I thought why not add a bit of silver to accentuate those seams and bolts in the background. Or screws or whatever they are called. So I used the luster wax with a brush. I have a little bit on my desk so I can close the jar right away. And then I'm just going to brush it on in different directions. And every now and then you get a little bit of a bigger blob, but that's totally fine. Just add a bit in different places to bring out that texture even more. Now this is starting to look like it. When I pick up the wax, I'm wiping it off on my scrap piece of paper to make sure that there's not too much on my brush. A bit in a way like dry brushing. And when you get a bigger blob in one spot, then just add a little bit more in another spot and it just looks like you did it on purpose. I always really like the way you can bring out that texture using a paste like this. You can also use a paint or gesso and dry brush with that. I like the look of the silver because it goes so well with the ring that's around my centerpiece. Or focal point or, well, the thing that's in the middle with my silver circle around it. And with that grungy look going on the background, I thought my silver circle was way too pretty. So I took a nail file and gave it a bit of a grunge treatment, just filing bits and pieces of the silver away from the circle. And this way it looks a bit less shiny. The Cardstock shows in different places, giving you a bit more color variation, making it fit better with the background and with me as well. Then I'm going to add a bunch of silver drops on top of that silver ring, embroidering on that screw theme that I have going on in the background. And after drying, I pressed in my knife. You can use anything sharp to get a bit of that bolt or screw look. So I thought, how about a bit more sparkle? And for that I use some pre-made drops. You can also use some jewels or gemstones or well, whatever you have lying around. And I'm going to divide a bunch of those drops to the background. And then I use the same drops as a glue, which works great because it doesn't show because it's the same color. And to finish the card I use a printed sentiment. Now this was a really cool project to work on. And if you want to make this project or a project like this and use Wonky Willie, he is available as a printable freebie with some fun quotes. And you can find the link in the description box below this video. And make sure to also check out his friends in my Gumroad store. I just outline my sentiment scribbling with a fine liner, and this makes that the sentiment is not floating on my card, but it's more one with the background. And I also like the way it looks. And I'd love to hear from you if you think this is a pretty decent place for both Wonky Willies to swim in. Are you ready to dive in? Now make sure to keep your head above water. Easy. In case you missed Wonky Willie, you can find him right here. And as always, make sure to keep on crafting.